I highly recommend a book about the life of a guy named Louis Zamperini, or Louis Zamperini. You ever heard of it? The book is called Unbroken. In fact, there was a movie by the same title, Laura Hildenbrand. Fantastic book. It'll blow your mind. I'm going to tell you a piece of it. Don't worry, I'm hardly spoiling it. Like, there's so much to read and understand about this guy's life. But he was just a pretty impressive guy. Louis was a runner. In high school, he broke the national record for the mile, and his record as a mile runner stood for 20 years. This guy was fast. He was so good that at the age of 19, he qualified to be in the Olympics, the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. If you know your world history, that was a crazy Olympics. It was just before World War II. Adolf Hitler had come into power. He was so good, he actually got to meet Adolf Hitler. The guy was impressed at how fast Zamperini was. He made a name for himself. He was famous. He became nationally famous, even world famous for his speed. Then, after the Olympics, something else happened. World War II began. And Louis, like so many other boys, signed up to be in the military. He joined the Army Air Corps, and he became a bombardier. He's working in a bomber, and the guy becomes a national war hero. This next picture is of him after he flies a couple of missions. This is him looking at the holes that were shot in the bomber that he had just landed in. And that picture became famous and helped to raise a lot of war bonds. The guy became just an absolute icon. If you'd have been around in the 1940s, you would know the new name Louis Zamperini. You would know his story. You would know his fame. You would know what happened. But all of that fame and all of those accolades could not stop what happened in the Pacific Ocean in 1942. His bomber was shot down by German fighter jets. He landed in the Pacific Ocean and stayed on a raft for 47 days. 47 days, that alone would be enough to kill anybody. But he survived somehow. The book talks about it. It's insane, his story. And just when he thought he was saved, there was a ship on the horizon, and they saw him, and they came and picked him up. Turned out that it was a Japanese ship. He became a prisoner of war. He ends up in Japan in a prisoner of war camp. And I'm going to tell you, that is the place you do not want to be in World War II. Just for comparison, we talk in America a lot about what happened in Europe and especially in Germany, and you think of the Germans, and there was certainly a lot of people who certainly died at the hands of the Germans. We know all about that. But for an American in a POW camp, only about 1% of Americans in prisoner of war camps in Germany died. In Japan, 33% of our American prisoners of war died in these camps. They were treated horribly, and Louis lands in that situation. He's forced to work forced labor with barely any food. They use him like a lab rat to test all kinds of medications. He gets very, very sick. He has to do unthinkable things, and many of them at the hand of this one prison guard who's just absolutely the devil incarnate. The things that this particular prison guard does, Louis talks about in his book, it's insane. It's crazy. It's mean. Inhumane, defiling things. It was bad. Yet somehow, Zamperini survives. And so on September 9th, 1945, he's released from the prisoner of war camp. He ends up back home. And just when you think all of his pain and his trials were behind him, actually things begin to get worse for him. Despite his international fame, and of course his national fame as both an athlete and now as a war hero, the PTSD is just too much to bear. So he finds himself unable to sleep at night, and he's just having these night terrors and these nightmares where he's constantly reliving the moments where this terrible prison guard was abusing him. He turns to alcohol to self-medicate. He becomes an alcoholic. He's violent, he's abusive, and he's losing his mind. One night in the middle of a terrible dream he's having where he's encountering this prison guard that he was, been so hurt by, he wakes up to realize he was attacking his wife. It was very bad. She got to the point where she wanted a divorce. He got to the point where he was just done living. And he decided, there's only one thing to do. I got to go to Japan. And I got to find that prison guard. And I'm going to kill him. He's got this plan working out, but before he leaves, his wife, who has decided not to leave him at this point, says, hey, listen, will you come with me to this thing that's happening? There's this guy speaking. I'd like for you to hear him. Turns out the guy's name was Billy Graham. Billy Graham was a preacher who did these crusades all over America, and he shared the gospel, and he taught people about the forgiveness and the grace of Jesus. And Louis, this hardened, war veteran, this guy who'd lived through prisoner of war camp, he goes to this gathering where Billy Graham is sharing the message of Jesus, and his heart is broken. He realizes who Jesus is, and with tears in his eyes, and despite all the plans he has, he gives his life to Jesus. And he decides in that moment, I'm going to be different. I'm going to be changed. I remember being bullied some in elementary school. I remember coming home and just fantasizing about how I was going to embarrass those guys when I got back. You can understand the position that Louis might have been in when he wanted to go to Japan, take out the people who had brought him so much pain and so much harm. I want to ask you a question. What do you do when it seems like the world is out to get you? You know, how do you respond when you've got bitterness and anger and unresolved frustration in your life? We're going to get back to Zamperini, but I want to get into the last session of our teaching series, Baggage Claim. We've been going through this idea of like, what is the baggage that we carry from day to day? You got the image of the carousel with the luggage on it at the airport, you know, as I was in the video there. And you get off your airplane, and you go down, and you're supposed to pick up your bags, right? The stuff with your name on it. But in life, we tend to carry like what's ours, and then also stuff that we're not supposed to carry. God has this plan to help us carry our burdens and help us to lay them down, and he surrounds us with people who can help us carry our burdens. And the whole series has been all about those various things. Today, what I want to talk about is one of the hardest things to let go of. And I'm just going to call it bitterness. Anger, frustration, maybe you've been mistreated, you've got jealousy, you've been betrayed, broken trust. Like, this is a big umbrella statement for all the things that people might need you to forgive them for. We're going to get to forgiveness. This isn't innately a lesson about forgiveness. I've talked about it a lot, and we will many times. But I think if you're honest with yourself, forgiveness is like one of the hardest things for you to offer, isn't it? You hurt me. You don't deserve it. I would rather retaliate and have revenge than to allow you to have the pleasure of being forgiven. But on our side of the fence is what I'm just going to call bitterness. Grab your Bibles today. We're going to dive into a story where we meet a guy named Joseph. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 42. Genesis chapter 42 is the story of the life of Joseph. And he learns a principle that I learned in high school. So I got this letter once when I was in high school from a friend that I met at summer camp. And we used to write letters back and forth to each other. Some of you guys who don't remember letters, this is before texting, this is before email, this is before, you couldn't even make long-distance calls without paying money. And so this is like ancient time. It's like the 1700s. We've got our like little, wigs on, and we're dipping our quills in the well of ink, and we're my dearest Jeremy, we're writing letters. And so it was like that. So that's what you can picture. There were smoke signals, there were pigeons. It was a long time ago. But I wrote this letter, and I don't know what I was going through. I must have been dealing with some forgiveness issues or some bitterness. But my friend must have gone to the local Christian bookstore and bought this postcard. And it had a phrase on it that blew my mind. Maybe you've heard it before, but I'd never heard it before. My 10th grade self blew my mind. This is what the phrase on the card said. It said, "Let go and let God." You ever heard that phrase? It's common. You're like, yeah, I've heard that. It's on bumper stickers, it's on t-shirts. But for my high school self, this was revolutionary. Like, wait a second. I can just let it go? I don't have to hold on to all this resentment and pain and bitterness. And I remember to this day, in my 40s now, I look back decades later, and I go, that was a pivotal moment for me to understand who God is in my life. The power he has to carry the burdens that I try to carry myself. Let go and let God. As we get into Genesis chapter 42 today, we're looking into the life of Joseph. Joseph, he gets a lot of face time in the Bible. In fact, 14 chapters of the book of Genesis are dedicated to the life of Joseph. In the Old Testament, only 3 other people get more face time than Joseph. Even if you're not a Christian, you would know these names. Names are Abraham, Moses, and King David. Next is Joseph. We know a lot about Joseph. We see him go through quite a roller coaster of a life. And we see what it means for someone to let go and let God. As we lead up into chapter 42, I want to let you know we're going to go through like 8 chapters of the book of Genesis. I'm going to be skipping a rock through the last part of the book of Genesis. And so get your Bibles out. Be ready to look at it. The scripture will be on the screen. You can use your phone. You might want to take some notes here because there's a lot to get there. And to get to where we are, I got to give you some backup, okay? So if you don't know the story of Jesus, let me give it to you in 5 bullet points, okay? Bullet point number 1. Joseph's brothers resented him because he was their father's favorite. They resented him, and so they throw him in a pit, and they sell him into slavery. You thought you got mad at your siblings? Did you ever sell one of your siblings into slavery? Joseph's brothers did. Okay, so that's step 1, bullet point number 1. His brothers resented him. He's sold into slavery. Bullet point number 2. He goes off into slavery into Egypt, but he actually prospers there. In slavery, he does quite well for himself, until he's falsely accused for something and ends up thrown into basically a dungeon to die. He gets put in prison. And so he finds himself in prison. This is the roller coaster. I'm the favorite. I'm in a pit. Oh no, I'm a prisoner. I'm a good prisoner. I'm a good slave. I'm making all kinds of money. Now I'm back and I'm in prison now. Point number 3. From prison, God allows Joseph to interpret the dreams of Pharaoh. We're talking the king of Egypt. He interprets these dreams which predict a 7-year famine, and it's incredible. And so, point 4, Pharaoh elevates Joseph from the dungeon to the second most powerful person in Egypt. Egypt is the most powerful country in the world at this time, at least in this region. And so he has had quite a turnaround, right? And he's there to manage the famine. I want you to manage the goods of the pre-famine time and so that people can eat. And it's mostly grain, okay? Which takes us to point 5. Way back in Canaan, where Joseph's brothers lived, yeah, the same guys who threw him into a pit, they're getting hungry during a famine. And so they're loading up their donkeys and camels to head to Egypt to ask for grain from guess who? Their brother Joseph. And they have no idea that it's him. Okay, is that the setup? A lot of you know the story, maybe you don't, but that gets you to chapter 42. And that picks us up right in the story where their dad, his name is Jacob, makes a suggestion that they run to Egypt and see if they can find some groceries. Chapter 42, verse 1. It says, when Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, why do you just keep looking at each other? I love that. And he continued, I have heard that there's grain in Egypt. Why don't you go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die? And so here come his murdering brothers headed to Joseph, and they have no idea that he's the guy who's supposed to give them some grain. Give a little time check, okay? It's been 23 years now since they have thrown their brother in a pit. Joseph was like 17 at the time. He's now in his 40s. These guys, some of them are in their 50s. They have grown up. They have changed a lot. And we're going to see what happens as they arrive. Starting in verse 6. We're skipping down in chapter 42 to verse 6. So now Joseph was the governor of all the land, the person who sold the grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. But as soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them. But he pretended to be a stranger. So he spoke harshly to them. Where do you come from? He asked. From the land of Canaan, they replied, to buy food. Oh, so you need me now, huh? You need some, you hungry? What, you hungry or something? You'll make some bread? That's cute. Yeah, where you from, boy? What would you have done if you were in his shoes? I mean, at the very least, you're like, let me think. I got an idea. No. Or like you feel a little bit more vindictive, you can say, hey, guards, hey, will you arrest these men and take them to prison? In fact, take them to my old cell. Yeah, that would seem about right. He might have had their heads cut off, right? What could he have done? Anything. What would you have done? I think Joseph wrestled with this same thing for a while. And so he's got a few tests that he's going to run them through. In verse 13, we're still in chapter 42. Skip down to verse 13. He's got this notion. He said, I'm going to accuse them of being spies. You're spies. Verse 13. But they replied, whoa. No, we're not spies. Your servants were 12 brothers, the son of but one man who lives in the land of Canaan. We promise. In fact, the youngest is now with our father, and one is no more. Joseph's like, yeah, one is no more. Okay. Yeah, I know that story. So the first thing he does is he throws them in jail for 3 days. I think this is his equivalent to like parents. Have you ever had to like put your kids in their room and just take a breath and count to 20? Like, this is Joseph. I think he's like, okay, what are we going to do? First of all, go to jail. I think you're a spy. So 3 days later, and then he comes up with a plan. And so this is basically what he tells them. He says, I'm going to let you go home, but you're spies, and I'm sure of it. So you leave one of your brothers here with me. And if you're who you say you are, sure, go back to Canaan, and you get that youngest brother. What'd you say his name was? Benjamin? Yeah, go find old Benji and bring him back to Egypt. Just prove to me who you are. Then you can have your brother back. And so they leave without grain, and they begin to make the trip back to their homeland. They say in verse 21, chapter 2, verse 21. See, we're skipping along. They say to one another, I imagine they have a little huddle. Oh, surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come. 23 years later, they still believe, I don't know if it's just like superstition or what, but they believe that, oh man, we are now being punished for what we did to Joseph all those years ago. They hit the road. But Joseph isn't done with his brothers. He's got a test for them. He's going to have a couple tests. As they hit the road, he has somebody fill their bags with grain. Also, along with the grain, a bunch of silver that they didn't pay for, the grain or the silver. And they go to their campsite that night as they're traveling home, and they open up their bags to get out their water jugs or whatever. And lo and behold, oh my goodness, there's grain in the bag. Hey, who put his grain in my bag? This is not my grain. And then someone digs further and goes, did somebody put a lot of silver in my bag? And suddenly they're freaking out. They're like, it looks like someone's planted stuff in our bag to make us look like spies. Turns out, it's exactly what happened. Their brother had put stuff in their bag to make them look like spies. And so what do? So that they continue their journey home. They go home. They find their dad, Jacob, and they say, listen, this is what happened. Okay, we got there. There was this really mean guy there, and he was making a big deal. He thought we were spies. He threw us in prison for a little while. He sent us home. He said, we gotta take our brother Benjamin back to Egypt. And they kept, the brother Simeon was his name. They kept Simeon back in Egypt. And I don't know what we're going to do, Dad, but we got to go because now we got grain in our bags that we didn't pay for. We got silver in our bags that's not ours. We got to take this back. And Dad says, no, you ain't going back to that guy. Look, I've already lost one son. By the way, they told their dad that Joseph had died, that he'd been attacked by a wild animal. As far as their dad believed, his son is dead. I've already lost one son. Now you've lost Simeon. There's no way we're getting Simeon back. You left him with that crazy governor in Egypt. There's no way I'm giving you another one of my sons to go back to that crazy guy. And so they stay. Presumably they eat all the grain because they're hungry. And they stay until the family gets hungry again. And guess where the only grocery store is? Egypt. We're going to have to go back. And I don't know how long the time was. You could probably do the math as you read the story. Are you following along? You with me? Okay, it's a lot to get into. We're going to skip ahead some in just a minute. So if you want to go ahead and flip to chapter 43, I think is next. Yeah, 43. We'll get there in a second. They get back and they go to Joseph's secretary. He's the governor, right? He's got some bureaucracy underneath him, and they explain the whole thing. Yeah. We're those guys. You remember us? We were here a little while ago. Yeah, we're those guys. And see, what had happened was your boss, he took our brother and he put him in prison. And he said, we got to go get our other brother. But meanwhile, we were making the trip, and there was this grain in our bags and silver in our bags. It's not ours, I promise. In fact, what we did was we brought extra silver back to pay you back because we promised. And he's like giving this whole story. And the secretary's like, whatever. Yeah, the governor would like to see you now. And they're like, oh. So they go in to see their brother. They don't realize that it's him. And Joseph comes out, and he's changed gears now. Instead of being super mean, he makes it super awkward. He invites them over for this lavish dinner. He fills their plates up. He's like, oh, my friends from Canaan, I'm so glad that you're here. And they talk to him about what's going on. He's like, oh, there was extra silver in your bag? Well, I'll be. And maybe your God is favoring you. And these guys are confused. Like, what is going on with this guy? In verse 27, now we're in chapter 43, okay? So we turn the page. Chapter 27, Joseph's talking to his brothers. He asked them, how is your aged father you told me about? He's still alive? They replied, your servant, our father, is still alive and well. And they bowed down and they prostrated themselves before him. And as he looked down, he saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son. Quick aside here. So their dad had multiple wives. This is ancient times. And the only sons of one of the moms were Joseph and Benjamin. Benjamin is his only blood brother. In fact, one of the reasons that the other brothers were jealous is because their dad liked Joseph's mom best. And so he was afraid Benjamin might have been getting beat up on too. You follow that? So they're so glad that that Benjamin has come back. He saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son. He asked, "Is this your youngest brother?" Remember, he was just a kid. Now he's a man. How crazy, 23 years later. "The one you told me about?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out, and he looked for a place to weep. And he went into his private room, and he wept there. And after he'd washed his face, he came out, and he controlled himself, and he said, "Serve the food." And they have this lavish meal. Benjamin gets extra food. I love that part. Keep it together, Joseph. He's got to go cry in his room. Like, this is emotional for him. He has been on like a roller coaster you couldn't imagine. And here before him is his brother. And then the meal happens and they get their grain. But Joseph's not quite done with them yet. He doesn't trust them yet. And you know there's got to still be a little bit of bitterness in his heart. So he sends them back home with their grain with another little test. He actually has someone slip into Benjamin's bag his personal silver cup. Puts it in the bag. Sends them on their way. "All right, buddy. Hey, y'all have a safe trip. Yeah, call me when you get home." But he tells some guards to set up a checkpoint down the way and says, "Listen, I'm missing my silver cup. Will you search those guys' bags? And will you make sure they don't have it?" So they get to the checkpoint, and the guard says, "Oh, halt. The governor says he's missing his silver cup, and you were just at his house. He thinks maybe you took it." And then, verse 4, we're now in chapter 44. Shoom. Chapter 44, all the way in verse 7. "But they said to him, 'Why does my Lord say such things? Far be it from your servants to do anything like that.'" He goes on to say, last time there was extra silver in our bag. We brought that back with us with interest, okay? I promise you. Ask the governor. He knows. He said it was cool. We just had a meal at his house. Verse 9, they take a step further in talking to the guard. "In fact, if any of your servants is found to have this silver cup, he will die, and the rest of us will become your slaves." They are confident that this silver cup is not in the bag, but guess what happens when the guards open the bag? There's the cup in Benjamin's bag. Can you imagine? "Benjamin, what'd you do, man?" "I promise. He gave you extra food and everything, man. Why'd you put the cup in your bag?" "I promise. I didn't put the cup in my bag." It looks like Joseph's test this time was this, okay, you hated me for my mother's sake and the fact that I was our dad's favorite, okay? And you threw me in a pit, you put me in slavery, and actually I'm doing pretty good right now, so I'm not too worried about you. But my little brother, would you take care of him? I'm going to put him in harm's way. I'm going to make him the guilty thief of the Pharaoh's governor. I think Joseph was wondering, are you going to bail on Benjamin the way you bailed on me? But they don't. In fact, this time, all the brothers return back to Egypt. And one of the brothers, Judah, he makes this impassioned plea to Joseph. He goes to Joseph and he's like, "Sir, we cannot go back home without our brothers. We can't do it. Our father had another son who is no more, and Simeon's been missing for all this time, and we finally got him back. And if we go back without Benjamin, Dad is just going to die. He will die of grief. We cannot do this." He made this impassioned plea. 23 years earlier, it had been that same brother, Judah, who had the idea of throwing Joseph into a pit. 23 years later, he's singing a different song. And he's deciding to do the right thing this time, given the chance to do it again. So we skip now to chapter 45. We're one more chapter down the road. "Then Joseph could no longer control himself. Before all of his attendants, he cried out, 'Have everyone leave my presence!' So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? You cannot understate this next sentence. But his brothers were not able to answer him. Their jaws are on the floor. Say, what? How? You remember when you had a little kid and like you could pull a quarter out of their ear? Because you're a magician. And really you just have it behind their head. And you're like, "Pada!" And your kid's like, "Blah! Where'd you get that quarter from? It's in my other ear now?" Like these guys are totally, where'd you come from? And so Joseph, I love how he leans in. Let's see. His brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. And then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. You don't get close to the governor. Come close to me. And he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold to Egypt. And you just got to know, like maybe he spoke their mother tongue to them right then. I don't know how. There's got to be a moment where there's a secret password kind of moment. It's like, and they're instantly terrified because, like, on the one hand, because you know, if you watch like Hallmark Christmas movies, there's always a happy ending, and you're like, yay, the brothers got back together. No, not yay. The last time they saw this guy, he was screaming, please don't put me in slavery. And now he's the second most powerful person in the world. Oh, that's where the grain in our bags came from. That's where all the silver came from. Uh-oh. But his brothers were not able to answer him. Verse 5. And now, do not be distressed. And don't be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. Now, I don't imagine that they actually took that in that moment. In fact, we're going to find out in a minute that they didn't. They didn't take that in. They didn't absorb that. But Joseph's perspective is interesting. He goes on to explain how he interpreted Pharaoh's dream, how there was this famine, and if it hadn't been for God's provision in the dream, that like everyone would have died in the famine, but he was able to, stock up the grain and distribute it out and ration it out. God intended good out of this moment. Now here's the thing. I want to make it clear. I don't believe that God intended the brothers to do evil. That's not how God works. He doesn't intend you to do evil. But here's what I've learned. God will take the evil of this world and use it for his good. All the time. All the time. So God uses Joseph to save thousands of lives. And later we see that Joseph eventually, he does reunite with his father. He brings his dad and the whole clan down to Egypt. And they prosper there. In fact, the nation of Israel begins to grow and grow and grow. They become like over 1 million people. And that's when we hit the scene where like Moses comes to town. And guess what? All of those many tribes of Israel become the nation that Jesus is born of. And none of that would have happened the way that we know it. Had Joseph not gone through the things that he went through, had these guys not thrown him into a pit and God used their evil for his good, let go and let God. Even when we're in our darkest moments, God's light pierces through. There's nothing too dark that God's light can't shine into. And so maybe if you're in one of those moments, maybe there's bitterness, resentment, hate, there's someone in your life that just ruined you. I want you to know that even in that, our God can use the evil of this world for his good. So what baggage are you carrying? What resentment, bitterness, or something that needs to be forgiven are you holding on to? Let it go. It's easier said than done, right? I mean, let it go. Oh, sure, fine. But let it go and let God. Pause, Joseph. Back to Louis Zamperini. So Louis is world famous. He's back in America, but he's struggling and he's made a decision to go back to Japan. But he meets Jesus and it starts to transform his life. The love and the grace of Jesus transforms him and transforms him and transforms him. But he decides, I am going to go back to Japan. And on this trip, instead, he decides to try to meet every single prison guard that he can, that abused him. And he does. He finds quite a few of them. And he meets with them and he says, I need you to hear something. I forgive you. Some of them had been charged as war criminals and were living in prison. He had to talk to them through offense. Some of them didn't want to hear it. Many of them in tears said, I'm sorry. And he said, I forgive you. That one particular guard, the devil in the flesh that beat him so badly, he does eventually find him. And he sets up an appointment to meet with him. He's in prison at that time. And the guy refuses to meet with him. In fact, he maintains that he did nothing wrong. He said he was in the right. Here's the thing about forgiveness. Sometimes it's like that. But forgiveness is not for them. Forgiveness is for you. Because when you can let go and let God, you can be released from the burden of living in the past when that offense happened. You can truly let it go. And even though that guard didn't accept his apology or even agree to meet with him, guess what? Lewis was finally free. He walked out, finally able to let go of the things that had happened in his past. That's the ultimate freedom of forgiving people. You're not stuck in the moment anymore. And then Zamperini does something that's so amazing. He takes this last third chapter of his life and he completely devotes it to taking his fame to making the name of Jesus famous. He travels around and he speaks and he talks about forgiveness and he tells this very same story over and over and over and over again. And countless people come to know the grace and the love and the forgiveness of Jesus because this one guy was willing to let go and let God. Were there nights when he still struggled with the night terrors? I'm sure of it. Did he still suffer from PTSD from the war? Absolutely, I'm sure of it. But he was able to get off alcohol, he was able to restore his marriage, and he was able to go around and help people find the transformation that comes in Jesus. Joseph's story was a roller coaster, and maybe you've been there. Years later, Joseph's dad, Jacob, dies. And all the brothers now are scared because maybe the only reason Joseph's being nice to us is because our dad's still alive. So they come to him and they express their fear that, okay, now that dad's dead, I get it. You can throw us in prison or whatever it is. But this becomes a definitive moment in Joseph's life. If you want to flip all the way to chapter 50, this is the end of the book of Genesis. And in verse 19, Joseph says to them, nah, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done in the saving of many lives. What if God can use your bitterness, your brokenness, your hurt, your pain to bring untold thousands to his grace? What if what you're going through, it's inexcusable, the evil that might have been placed on you. But what if you let go of it and you're able to forgive and move on? What if through that moment, God's able to redeem so many others? That your story becomes the catalyst for someone else's transformation. Let go and let God. This week, I want to give us something tangible. Forgiveness is hard. So I'm going to give us our challenge as we do every week. And it's 3 words, okay? But let me just give you our challenge. As hard as it may be. This week, take one step towards letting go of the bitterness you carry. And here are 3 words that can help you. You can do this with write, pray, talk. Write, pray, talk. Let's talk about them. Write. Take some time this week. Think right now. What's something that you're just holding on to? This is particularly like someone else has sinned against you. Someone has hurt you. You're holding a grudge. You're holding bitterness. Write. Get a quill and the jug of ink. Email. A Google document. And write out what happened to you. And write out how that person hurt you. This is therapy. You could pay a lot of money for this. I'm giving it to you for free. Okay? Write it down. Just write it. And listen, you don't have to send it to them. This is just right. This isn't sinned. This is right. Because some of the therapy just comes by digging it up and putting it out there. I don't deserve to carry this anymore. You don't deserve to carry this anymore. Take it out and put it out there. Just get it on paper. Right. In your writing, find a place where you can say, I'm letting this go. I forgive them. That's right. 2, pray. That last part's hard, the actual forgiveness part. And so if you really want to dig into forgiveness, this is the worst thing I could ask you to do. But it'll set you free. Pray every day for that person by name. It is hard to be mad at someone that you pray for every day. It's very, very hard. If you don't believe me, ask me. I've done it. And I could give you a list of people that I'm not praying for anymore. Because I let it go. Pray for them by name. Pray that God can help you learn forgiveness. Pray that God can help them change and maybe not hurt other people. But this isn't for them. This is for you. Pray. Pray that God will heal the brokenness in your heart. Pray that you will have the courage maybe to do step 3. This doesn't work for everybody. Some people it's best just to let it go. But the last one is talk. The boldest step you can take towards reconciliation and forgiveness is to talk to the person. Again, you need to do this with discernment and wisdom and prayerful counsel of other people, because sometimes it might not be best for you to go approach that person. But talk. That's where you can actually hit send on that email that you wrote. That's where you can send them a text or set up a coffee or a phone call. Be prepared. Some of them might be like that prison guard, and they don't want to have anything to do with it. And that hurts, but it's not for them. It's for you. But I've done this a couple of times, but one very serious one that I carried for almost 20 years. I finally wrote, and I waited, and I prayed, and then I sent a letter, which was followed by a phone call from the person. And oh my goodness. You know, I had no idea what that person was going through all those years ago that led them to treat me so poorly, and they were so sorry. They didn't realize they had hurt me. They apologized, and it led to some really good conversation and reconciliation. It's doable. But the first step is to decide, can I let go and let God? This is a trust. This is a faith issue. Do I trust God enough? Is God big enough? Is he truly the creator of my soul? Then can I trust him with this thing? The answer is yes, but it takes some time to understand that. You know, Joseph could have stayed bitter. Zamperini could have gone to Japan and committed murder. But both of them were freed by offering forgiveness. And both of their stories were completely different. You know, if Joseph had gone and killed his brothers, the entire nation of Israel wouldn't have been. God would have worked that out. He would have had a plan for it, but man, the fact that he didn't have to, the fact that we can tell the story of Judah, the tribe that Jesus came from, the same guy that threw his brother into a pit. That's your story. Our goal is to simply encourage one another to let go of the baggage. Let go and let God, because when you release that burden, you're the one that walks free. Let me pray for us today.